Hey guys, this is Thomas Bird with Tabletop Life, here to give you a reaction to the latest Leagues of Votann Balance update. I'm sure you're a little aware of all the changes and all the hype and all the angst over Leagues of Votann, and the update came out so quickly. There's been quite a lot of videos out, a lot of commentary on the changes. I intentionally wanted to wait a little bit, let it sink in. Let me go and play a game with the army post nerf and kind of get a feel for that. You know, we've been playing these videos and these games with the full 2,000 points from the get-go, even before the release of the box set. And you know, we've had quite a few games, competitive games against a lot of competitive meta armies that were looking for answers and solutions to the Votann menace, and we started to see some cracks in the pre-nerf Votann. There was definitely some weaknesses. Felt it was very strong, but also felt like there was ways around it. Right. So when the nerf came out, quite honestly, I was a little sad because I was super excited about Votann. I was very excited about the new army, the look and feel of it, before we ever got kind of into the rules and the full power of it. But you soldier on. Changes are made. You just gotta roll with the punches. That's how this game works. And let's go play a game with the new changes. But just kind of wanted to take a quick run through the changes, talk a little bit about what I think. Again, I was kind of from the beginning thinking it's not that big a deal. Like, they are strong. They are very strong. Probably against the middle tables, it might be a menace. But from a top high level competitive play perspective, I feel like a lot of different armies had answers to what the Votann can bring. So kind of looking at it, let's just go through the rundown real quick, talk through the changes, and then see where we shake out at the end. So we saw the update to the judgment tokens. So you basically had a one change to the judgment tokens. Basically, when you auto wound, the old rules were any auto wounds counted as unmodified wound rolls of 6. So there's a number of rules, mechanics that kind of proc off of that. So, with that change, now they no longer count as unmodified wound rolls of 6. So what does that really mean? What impact? Is that a big deal? From my perspective, judgment tokens, I really wasn't using most of those things. I was running the Beam League, so I wasn't really running Magna Rails. So you kind of think of the first big thing for wound rolls of 6 is spillover damage on the Magna Rails. So if you're running lots of Magna Rails, yeah, that's not gone. And as people have alluded to on the internet, it gets kind of worse if you have lots of judgment tokens. So if you auto wound, you don't even get a chance to roll for that 6. So even if you take a Greater Arthurian League and you have Uthar the Destined, where he can just pick one to be an auto 6, well, if you roll a hit, you can't make it a 6 because you auto wounded, right? So it gets to a situation where you're like, well, I'm going to save that auto wound 6 for a unit that has no judgment tokens, or I want to try to hit you and not put judgment tokens on you. So there's ways around it, but it's definitely kind of a big deal for Magna Rails if that was something that was scary to you. In my mind, I really wasn't playing too many Magna Rails. They were good in very specific scenarios. They could be very nasty against certain things, but it wasn't a gun that I was really relying on. It hurts the Trans-Siberian Alliance. That's something that a lot of people were looking at. That's one of the custom leagues. Basically, when you take a custom league, that's just the named leagues. They have 3 bonuses, 2 regular abilities, and kind of Ancestral Judgment bonus. Their Ancestral bonus is 6s to wound, unmodified wound rolls of 6 count as extra AP. Right, so a lot of the weapons inside Votann are AP2. Get a couple AP3s. Extra AP was kind of good, right? So now if you're auto wounding on hits, you're never really going to get to count as auto wound of 6, and you're not going to get that extra AP. So that league pretty lost one of their big bonuses. So cry me a river, I guess, if you're not a Votann fan, but that hurt. No, that was hurtful. if that was your go-to guys. That was the orange colored scheme guys. The Brokir Forge Master, so like he had a special rule. Anytime he wound rolled a 6, his weapon damage converted to mortals. So that was pretty big. I mean, he's got a 3-shot gun. He's got 3 attacks in melee. So if he's hitting people with judgment tokens, he potentially can dump mortal wounds. His damage is 2, but it's grab, so it could potentially be 3 per hit. So it's good. I mean, how many things does he get in a shoot or attack? Does it have tokens? You know, the big kind of misnomer when you play Leagues of Votann is everything is just one around with 3 judgment tokens, which is usually not the case. Outside of Great Arthurian League, which they just count as having extra, most of the time, you know, you get 1 or 2. You can put 3 on a big thing that's scary if you do some work to make that happen. But you're not picking up 3 judgment tokens till the late game. Usually, you know, if you're shooting at things, they may have 1 token on it. You know, maybe it's 2 because it's like turn 2 that came out and they already had done an action. But you're not usually having 3 on many things. You're usually killing it well before that, or shooting at it, you know, and trying to get rid of it before it has 3. So, like, you know, that's a nice to have, but I'm not really missing his wound conversion because it really rarely came up. He's never really in range to shoot. And then the Ion Storm strat's the last one, the Mortal Wound strat. But this is big. I mean, you know, in the context of I'm going to dump a lot of mortal wounds on you. There's a certain builds with the Ymir conglomerate where they can like stack multiple mortal wound strats together. So you can spend 2 or 3 CP and really just dump up to 16 mortal wounds. You have to build the tanks a certain way to kind of take advantage of that. You have to take ion weapons, which those are beams, those are ion weapons on guys, to kind of maximize the ability. So it's not automatic, but for the most part, you could easily get 10 to 12 mortal wounds consistently if you spent for the rerolls and chose your targets right with tokens. But isn't that one strat for ions now basically without unmodified wound rolls of 6 counting on the judgment hits, this strat's dead. Because right now you have to roll a natural 6 on the wound roll again. So you're kind of limited if it does have tokens and you auto wound, you don't get to roll. Or if you do hit and it doesn't have any tokens, you just got to roll 6s, right? And it's 1 mortal for every 6 up to a max of 6. So you're like, how many wound rolls do you have to get with ion guns? Which again, there's very specific units that have the option even to take ions, and they cost extra points. With the point increases, you know, that's a tall order. Yeah, you figure this strat's mostly dead. So, is that a big deal? I mean, no one wants to take extra 6 more wounds on top of the other strats. The other 2 strats are still there, so you still can, if you're taking Ymir, do up to 10 mortal wounds with normal damage. So, like, you still have the damage output there for that 1 unit. But again, if you're not taking Ymir, I don't even think you have any of those units or weapons. So then you're back to no mortal wounds. So it's very interesting. You can kind of go heavy into the mortal wound build or not. So with the increase of tanks, are you going to pay 320 points for an 18-inch range gun to try to do 6 mortal wounds? I don't know. Like, without Ymir getting plus 4 inches or taking a custom to get plus 4 inches, I don't know that 18 inches is going to cut it. So that strat loses a lot of value. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, if a lot of people push over to take all beams, or if they try to save points and just take the Magna Rail bolt cannon version, which is still pricey. From a army perspective, on top of that change to the judgments, they also changed all the points. And so, you know, some of the points you definitely understand why. Some of the points just kind of scratching your head. You're like, why? You know, but they just went whole hog. Every unit took some sort of increase. So you got the characters. You got Uthar the Destined, and that's the name guy for the Great Arthurian. He went up 20 points. Call, that's kind of like your captain. He went up 10 points. Your Einhard champion, he's kind of like your fighty guy. He went up 20 points. Your Grimnar, that's the Psyker. He went up 10 points. And the Brokir Iron Master, that's your basic tech marine guy. He went up 10 points as well. So the Votannic Council, that's the kind of the points you pay to upgrade them to like a Chapter Master, a Super Psyker, Super Tech Marine. Those points stayed the same. So, you know, a net effective the guys went up 10, 20 points per guy. So not a big deal. They're pretty cheap. The Forge Master, if you're taking tanks, super good deal. So he's probably, the guy that you look at, you're like, no way, that guy. That's still a bargain for the price you pay for there. Grimnar, 90 points, 115 points if you upgrade him. He's kind of in line with normal kind of Space Marine-esque type character prices. The Champion guy, he's kind of always the odd man out when you're talking about points and fitting him in the old lists. So now with the new list, well, I don't know that you'll see the Champion because he's also CP heavy. What you kind of see as you kind of go through the list, as you've lost these points, you start now wanting to take multiple detachments to try to drop troops and pick up more killy units. And when you do that, you're losing CP. And if you're taking an Einhard Champion, he demands that you spend CP on him. So like this army functions on some great stratagems. You really want strats, and the Champion, he just eats up those CP, and it's questionable where you get the return out of him. The troops, elites, and the fast attacks, you'll certainly see less warriors, I think, in most builds. Maybe out of the gate, if people are just using the standard boxes, depends on when tournaments allow, as far as 3D prints or until the new models get released. So when those are going to get released, I think the rumors are, end of October, they should see most of the units finished released. But 11 points going to 12 points a model, so probably the least percentage increase of all the models, but still a true perspective. Like, warriors are great, but they're not that great, so I don't know why they needed a point increase. Einhar Hearthguard, terrifying potential for mortal wounds and damage. They were already really pricey at 350. You could take a unit of 10 and feel good about that damage output. But they're vulnerable to certain things, so you had to be very careful with them because they're just 2 wounds each, easy to kill. Now at 450 points, they went up 10 points per model. It's really tough if you're going to take them at all. Maybe you take a smaller squad. They eat up a lot of points. It's their damage potential stayed the same, but that's a lot of eggs to put in one basket that potentially can get destroyed. So really, really tough. Lithonium Zerks, another one of those kind of middle-of-the-road units. They got a great data sheet. Obviously, at 110 points, 22 points a model for the unit, undercosted, right? So they got a big boost. They got probably like the biggest percentage-wise point increase. 26% increase up to 30 points a model. But they, in certain matchups, they're great, but a lot of times, I don't know that you're going to take these in every single list. You're certainly not taking 15 of them like maybe some units were before. So, Berserks, I gotta love-hate with those guys. They're okay. If you know how to deal with Repentia with Sisters, you know how to deal with Berserks. They're a lot slower, so they're great counterattacks. Offensively, it's a little bit different. It depends if your army's really built for melee, whether these guys are the ones that are going to get you. Hurricane Pioneers, they're probably one of the best units in the book. Just point per point, rules, damage. They went up some, but not very much. So 14%. So you're going to probably still see a lot of bikes in the new world of Votann. I've seen a lot of people talking about 12, 18 bikes, which is 18 would be the max, up to 6 per unit. Their pregame move, the amount of shots they put out. They only have a 4-up save, so they're very vulnerable to certain units. But they can potentially dump out a lot of alpha if you're going second. They just... If the Votann's going first, they just pregame move up 10, 12, and then they move 12 again, and they just can't shoot you to bits with a lot of shots. So I expect to see a lot of bikes. Sagittars, those are the little transports. They went up 20 points. So fairly reasonable for what you're getting. I was never a big fan of Sagittars. I could see people taking them more now to try to maximize combat squad, those smaller units of warriors. So you want to try to take less warriors because you're trying to save those points for other things. You take a Sagittar, basically that lets you combat squad that 10 men into 5 mans. So you would have to buy 2 of these tanks. So it's kind of the question of, in a world where you have less points, do you have points to afford Sagittars to split up your warriors? Maybe that's the right answer. They're fairly decent. They got some decent shooting profiles. They're sort of tough 7. with 9 wounds, 3-up save. You can give them an invulnerable save. You can make them toughness 8, depending on what league you take. So, you know, there's some play there. But it's really, are you taking them over a unit of bikes? Because they're a fast attack slot as well. So then it becomes a detachment challenge if you want to take more than 3 units of bikes, 3 fast. On the heavy support side, the Thunderkin, which most people were panning as DOA. Like, I love the Thunderkin. I love the look of the models. I was going to try to fit them in no matter what. They're pretty decent, depending on the right matchup, but they probably were the weakest unit in the book, comparatively. 35 points a guy, they raised them up to 40. So, poor Thunderkin. Even less likely, unless the love is real, that you're going to see these guys in most lists. The Hecaton Land Fortress is probably the biggest offender in kind of undercosted points. There's no way that tank should have ever been 230 points. Got raised up to 300 points. So I think that's reasonable. I still want to take 2 tanks, so that's a big chunk of change. They do a lot. They're very durable. They hold guys. So they do a lot of things in the army. But as you take more tanks, you have less points for other stuff. That's all has been increased. So it becomes an interesting challenge to decide if 1 tank's enough, or do you really want 2, and what you have to trade to kind of fit that in. The 23%, pretty sizable increase, but I think that's well in line. So how much did my old list increase? Certainly I had like 25 different lists. We were trying out all sorts of lists. So it really just depends, but on average, about 400 points. This current list I played last went up 420 points. And I tell you, I was pretty sad. I was really sad. I think I was sad for a whole day. Didn't even want to look at making a new list with the point changes. Just trying to contemplate, you know, what I had to take out to squeeze that 420 points in. So I've come back and made it. You know, you certainly have a lot less stuff, you know, and then is that the end of the world? No. I mean, they are still strong, but what you'll find is you just have a lot less footprint on the ground as far as number of units. So being able to do actions, be on objectives, you're very slow outside of bikes. You know, potentially if you have Sagittars, you can be fast potentially to drive up on the objectives, but like foot infantry are slow. I mean, that's just the nature of how this army works. So cutting angles, getting shots, you know, a lot of times you'll be like, I want to run up to this objective that's in the midboard. Well, you can't even get out of a transport and run far enough to get there typically. Or at least you can't do an action. You can't move and do it. You might be able to run, but you may not do an action. So like you're kind of dependent upon the bikes for the faster movement, or just a tank driving up and not shooting to kind of get on some of these things. So it changes a little bit how that army wants to play. And I think if you're a savvy opponent, you can really kind of capitalize on that if you're much faster than them. But their strengths are still, if they see you, they shoot you. If they can put a judgment token on you, their efficiency goes up. And then it just becomes a question of what units do they take to kind of maximize those bonuses, right? So bikes, kind of by their nature, fast fly, OPSEC, are probably one of the strongest ones. They have volume of fire. They can help in giving judgment tokens out. They're the ones you're going to see. They're fairly tough and durable. Toughness 5, a lot of wounds. Only a 4+ save with void armor, so you know, even just AP2, you know, that pushes them to their invulnerable save or past it if you don't have the Emir League with the invul save. They can really get messed up. I know Flamers from Demons, which is pretty common standard in most Demon lists, can just really just nuke a whole unit of bikes. And again, once you kind of lose that forward fast movement of the bikes, the Votann army becomes really foot slogging it, right? So do they have troops on the ground? Are they running the big tanks? You know, it becomes a different game. So it's interesting. So just kind of wrapping it up, final thoughts. You know, losing a 6 is the auto wound. It affects a few things, a few units. Me personally, it wasn't a big deal. Like auto wounds of 6, like it affects Magna guns, which I'm not using. I wasn't playing Trans-Hyperion Alliance, so sucks for them, but it wasn't affecting me. Tech Marine, he almost never got to shoot, so no big deal. You know, big point squeeze, so like building your army is a lot harder. Now you're trying to save points, or you're doing double patrols. We have lists that are just patrols because you're like, it's funny because you look at power levels. I always put the power levels on my list just because if I decide I want to put guys in reserve, or I know exactly how much each guy costs in power levels. So obviously you went from the standard 100-ish power level of the army down to the 70s or 80s now because you just have less units in your army. But they still hit hard if you can get sights and line of sight and shooting. So that becomes the thing, depending on the terrain. Are you able to see? Are you able to shoot? Are you able to get those judgment tokens in the right place? They can just auto wound you still. So, is that nerf enough or is it too much, right? So from a judgment token perspective, outside of the 6's auto wound, you're still auto wounding on 4s if you get 3 judgment tokens. Again, that can happen, and it does feel bad for your opponent when you're just auto wounding. Did they do enough to judgment tokens? Is it too much from a points perspective? Like, did they nerf them too hard into the ground? Like me personally, it hurt. It hurt a lot. Is it too much? Time will tell. I think I played a couple games last night, and against demons I got rickrolled, and then against Tyranid I still was able to dominate them pretty handily. So fairly strong against one of the top tier armies. And then demons, just I think you have to do some specific builds to kind of combat some of their deep strike and their leadership shenanigans. So if you haven't played against new demons, it can be pretty nasty. So I think Votann do have answers for them. It's just you have to just build your army a certain way. And I think a lot of armies are that way. So I don't know that it changes anything in the grand scheme. That's just the nature of this army, rock, paper, scissors of Warhammer. You're just going to have to build it. So the list that I originally took, I really didn't favor the brute force max out 3 of the best units. I was really kind of take a little bit of everything, kind of make it take all comers. That's the kind of way I want to do it. And obviously with the point changes, I can't do that anymore. So you kind of have to pick and choose. So, my thoughts probably a little overdone on the point. Some units just obvious. Some points you just like, why, right? But like I could see from the internet and the crowd mass reaction, it wanted something and it needed to be sizable. Otherwise, it wasn't going to have the impact that I guess people wanted to see. I think it was kind of overblown, the amount of hype about how bad it was. But I'm also kind of looking at it through the lens of I was playing Ultramarines and I'm playing against pre-nerf Tau clowns and Dark Eldar and Tyranids, right? Like, I've seen all this before, and you tone it down a little bit, and then I still can win against those opponents. Is it hard? Yes. But I kind of relish those types of challenges. I think a lot of people, immediately jump to it's a win scenario, and I think there's certainly ways. As a player playing with Votann, I feel like there's holes all in that army. So if you just know how to exploit them, but it's done what it's done. I think the nerf, the judgment is probably. I don't know that it's gonna help the feel bads for those people who care, and then the people who don't care, then it's fine. So it's kind of a net on that one even. So I still look forward to playing it. After my day of malaise, I was able to pick it back up and start getting back in there and making some new lists. I'm enjoying the Votann. Curious to see if after the changes, if a lot of people who are planning on jumping on it are going to jump ship, or if they're going to stick with it and still put out some Votann armies. I'm looking forward to all the releases so I can get the real models out there. But we're still filming games and we're still testing to see what the new lists are going to be. So hopefully, if you're watching it, you can learn whether you want to figure out how to beat the Votann, see some of their weaknesses, or if you're just a big fan of Votann themselves, come up with some new lists based on some of our ideas. So definitely tune in, check out those lists. If you like this type of video, hit that like and subscribe. It helps support our channel. And we'll see you next time.